You said something in the earlier introduction about the fact that you created a software. So do you have a software background? Like, are you academically trained in software?
No, not at all. No, I did my degree. I do have a degree, but it was in experimental psychology. I picked a degree that I thought was interesting, which is basically the science of how your brain works. And I think a lot of again, I don't want to call it a career because I don't think that's really an appropriate word, but a lot of my life choices have been doing stuff I think is going to be interesting and fun. So I picked a degree that didn't then allow me to go into a big city job, but it was interesting and fun. And I still think the human brain is the most fascinating thing in the known universe. It's the most complex thing that we currently know about.
Hello everybody, Gavin Coyle. I'm the Gaffer, back again with another brilliant guest all the way from England. His name is Jarvey Moss and he's the CEO of a company called Sable. And Sable is a disruptive technology that wants to help the industry in terms of getting paid. So a lot of our episodes have been how people aren't getting paid and, you know, how we can use systems and processes to try and alleviate and help us get those payments in the door. But I like the sound of this guy because he's talking about a system where it's collaboration on all levels, from the client all the way around, and everybody's joined into the process of payments from the client as soon as they release their payment into the ecosystem of getting paid and the transparency of getting paid. Long-winded, but when we get under the bonnet, I'm sure you're going to love it. Jarvey Moss, welcome to I'm The Gaffer.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Lovely to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, a lovely introduction, but when people hear the background, they're going to go, what's going on here? I'm The Gaffer. Am I on the right podcast? Where did this guy come from? Talk to me about the background stuff here. You're non-construction related. Let's just say that first.
That's a fair start. Yeah, definitely. I'm very new to the sector. I started out in the music industry. Started playing in bands. That was how I started my. I don't think you can call it a career, but my working life was making music. And then I wanted to get a mortgage, and that was quite difficult. So I became a tour manager, looking after more successful musicians, taking them around the world on doing gigs, which was great fun. And then when I had kids, I decided I quite like to see them. And I'd luckily had a little technology platform that I'd built that I used when I was touring to help me with that. And through technology and music, I met a tech entrepreneur and we started a business together, which was again nothing to do with construction. It was also nothing to do with music. I was there for about 8 years. We sold that and I started Sable, and I can explain why I started Sable if you'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I'd like to know, is there any name drops you want to put on in terms of music profiles of people that you worked with?
Well, I've worked with some pretty good artists. I had a great time. I don't know if my background's visible, but the one I was working with when I left touring was Rudimental. So I came over to Ireland a fair bit to do the shows at the big Irish festival shows and that with Rudimental.
Yeah.
But went all over the world basically. It was good fun.
But see, the beauty about guests like yourselves is that there's a humbleness as well. But like, in a way, if you're a tour manager, you're a project manager of a construction build before the show actually starts. You've all the logistics, you've all the labor, you've all the planning, you've all the scheduling, you know, probably more so than most. And it's a very dynamic environment. Have you not looked at that and said to yourself, oh, it's kind of construction like?
Well, we didn't do, I had on the bigger stuff, you have a production manager who'd help out with, on stage and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I think there's huge transferable skills. Actually, in my old business, my previous business, we hired all of our project managers from the events industry, because if you work in events, whether it's weddings or it's, gigs like I was doing, it's going to happen. There's going to be 80,000 people stood in that field, and they're going to expect a show to happen at the time that it's supposed to happen at. So you can't just go, oh, well, I'm afraid the schedule slipped. It just doesn't work. So people who come from an events background have a really good attitude to just making things happen and getting them done when they say they're going to. It's very different, I think, to if you've come from a particularly a software background in software engineering and you're looking at project management there, nothing's ever done on time and everything just slips. So I do think there's a lot of transferable skills, but I don't think there are many companies that spot that.
Yeah, no. I'm just thinking as you're talking there as well, like the amount of work that goes involved in doing what you're doing, and you said something in the earlier introduction about the fact that you created a software. So do you have a software background? Like, have you got are you academically trained in software?
No, not at all. No, I did my degree. I do have a degree, but it was in experimental psychology. But I picked a degree that I thought was interesting, which is basically the science of how your brain works. And I think a lot of I don't want to call it a career because I don't think that's really an appropriate word, but a lot of my life choices have been doing stuff I think is going to be interesting and fun. So I picked a degree that didn't then allow me to go into a big city job, but it was interesting and fun. And I still think the human brain is the most fascinating thing in the known universe. It's the most complex thing that we currently know about.
100%. And did you not use that? Did you not go into some sort of jobs after that you got your degree? Well,
I had to choose. So the university wanted me to stay on and continue my studies, and I had a call from the professor after it all finished, and they said, we'd like you to come back and keep going. And I said, well, I'm in a band because by then I'd decided that I was going to do music. So that's what I did with my time. Went off and did music instead.
So, but it's fascinating, the whole area of psychology and how the brain works and how we work and how behaviors interact with each other. Obviously, I have a safety background, so behavioral safety and stuff like that. And then looking at the aviation sector in terms of behavioral based safety and stuff like that. Like, it's fascinating. It's just, don't start me because we could probably be here for a different podcast when it comes to that stuff. But like, 4-year degree, was it?
It was 3 years, but we were very lucky. I was able to work. I went to university in 96 to 99, and I did 8. You do like 8 modules in the course basically, and one of them was artificial intelligence. So we got to work on the first neural networks in the 90s with the people who basically founded that discipline of that approach to artificial intelligence, parallel processing, and all that. And of course, now, I look now and I think, if I'd stuck at AI from then my life would have been a very different life, I'm sure. But I remember we had neural networks with like 128 nodes in. And obviously it's a classic cliche, but just the processing power that we're all just carrying around in our pockets now compared to what was available, the world has changed so dramatically. It's amazing.
And do you apply any of the principles in your day-to-day life, in your work life, or your home life, in terms of your lessons learned?
I think at heart I'm a scientist. So I really believe in the power of the scientific method to discover the best solution to a problem. And as a sort of hard-nosed scientist, I also understand or believe that most of what happens in our lives is down to random chance and what you might call good or bad luck, depending on your viewpoint. So a lot of my sort of approach to life is about trying to put myself into situations where serendipitous events might happen, because I believe that serendipity is the major driver of your life, for good or for bad, and you never really know which is going to be.
That's a deep conversation.
Yeah, maybe probably when the camera goes off, maybe.
I think it's brilliant. Like the power of, I believe that there's energies as well that have influences in terms of people's behaviors and the environment, the environment that you have, that you grew up in and that you're surrounded by, has a massive impact in her. And I'm not trained in the area at all, and I don't claim to be an expert in it, but it's just my own gut feeling, and I'm sort of mature looking back on things, that you are a product of your environment, and there is a generational thing as well, that, there's cultures that evolve out of families, and that you become part of that culture, or you don't become part of that culture, and you recognize, well, that culture is not for me. And it, seeing a lot of shifts, both in my own personal life, but also with other people's lives, where they've said, no, I'm sticking to this culture because this is the way my family's always done it, and this is the way we are. And they're very entrenched in the way they operate. And then there's other people who's like a bit like me, we're kind of like a maverick, and go, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be different.
There's a real problem, or that's a real feature, at least, of the construction industry as well. That if you actually think about how we build stuff now, there's a load of amazing technology and all sorts of things have come along, but we've still put a lot of bricks and blocks and things down, and there are beams and panels, and it's kind of done still very much as it has always been done for a very long time. And I think it is an industry where it is quite difficult to change people's entrenched behaviours. That's always difficult in any walk of life, but I think in construction in particular, the sort of the way that the dynamics between the different businesses in construction work, there's so little trust a lot of the time, and it's very adversarial. In those situations, it's just really difficult to try new things out because there's too much risk.
Yeah, and very little time.
And everyone's fighting fires constantly, and so you can't be looking ahead.
Yeah, we don't need you to come in with your maverick head on.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fair point. You're only slammed after finishing the last project, and you're straight into another project, and you don't have time to, sit down and have these sort of conversations. This is why the podcast was partly the reason the podcast came out as well, is that you're sitting in your car or your van going to work 45 minutes, and you're sort of, listening to people like yourselves, getting other different perspectives in terms of, how am I doing my business? Should I do it better? Can I do it better? How am I as a tradesperson? Can I be a better tradesperson? Where am I going? What's my goals and all that kind of stuff? And, I'm interested to see, how the hell did you actually open up the construction door, or why did you open up the construction door, considering your background? So where did that, Yahoo moment come to go, oh, we're going into construction?
Yes, good question. Well, when we were selling my previous business, I knew that I wasn't going to stay on after the sale. So I was looking for something else that I was going to do with my time. And I wanted the next thing that I did to be something that I felt had some positive social impact. I wanted something that made the world better. And I didn't really know what that looked like, but I thought I'll just go and have a talk to some people and see what I can find. And I started talking to people in renewable energy because I thought that would be a nice area to work where you could make the world better. And through that, I started meeting people who built wind farms, solar farms, and so on. And one of them, as well as building, he built solar farms, but he also built a small number of houses every year. And he told me a story about one of his subcontractors, who was an electrical contractor, who, working on a very large construction project, a supplier above him in the supply chain went bust. And he just told me the impact that it had on this guy's life, his family. Absolutely catastrophic event, completely devastating. That's right. And it had that had a really profound effect on me because I felt quite viscerally the unfairness of that, because he was saying, he was just a really nice guy, did a really good job, and for circumstances completely out of his control, he lost everything. And so I had that sort of emotional human response to it. And then I also had the sort of logical response that if that was my project, I don't want to lose a good supplier. That's really inefficient and it's going to cost me because now I've got to go out and find somebody new and, all of that. So I got interested in that specific problem. And then I learned just how big a problem it is, that the construction sector's got the highest insolvency rate of any sector of the economy. And it has terrible mental health issues. There's a highly inflated 3 or 4 times the national average suicide rate in the sector. And a lot of that's driven by the payment culture, or the lack of payment culture. As you said, you've got guests on here talking about it all the time. And then I learned that there is a sort of a solution, which is called a project bank account, that certainly the UK government's been using for a decade, that theoretically should solve the problem, but hadn't. And then I realized that there was an opportunity to take that concept, apply the new technology that had come in from the Fintech and the neobanks to that problem, to create something that was dedicated just for the construction industry to solve that issue. And if we do, then we'll make a load of money because it's a big problem in a big space, but also we'll make life better for tens of thousands of working families. And that was it. Once I realized all of that, I knew I had to try and do it.
And you thought about all of that on your own with no help from anybody else?
Oh, no, far from it. No, I mean, if only I were that clever. No, I met anyone and everyone who talked to me. And I give this as advice to people who are thinking about starting a business. What I did was I went to the people I knew, my network, and I said, does anyone know anyone who has anything to do with construction industry or finance? And if you do, could you introduce me, please? And then I'd meet those people and I'd ask them 2 questions. I'd explain what I was doing or what I was thinking about. And then I'd say, can you please tell me why I'm wrong? So I don't waste 5 years of my life doing something and you could have told me today not to bother. And then secondly, could you introduce me to 2 more people who you think will be interested in this? And if everyone introduces you to 2, you get exponential growth.
Love that. Absolutely love that. So you're basically teasing out your minimum viable product at a very early stage. So you're building the product with the customer in mind, not with your own idea or with your own sort of interpretation of what you think the problem is.
Yeah, and
very smart.
Through that process, I met my co-founder, who does come from the construction industry. So there is a big construction pedigree behind us. It isn't just some guy who's just come in completely cold. But we also got lenders, developers, quantity surveyors, fund monitors, project managers, everybody to help us actually design the system. Because if you ask people for advice and help, everyone loves to give you advice. Everyone wants to help, especially if they think you're actually trying to solve a problem. But people are amazingly open and helpful. And those various different people helped us from their perspective talk about the problem and helped us to design something that would make their working life easier and solve the problem from their perspective. We did that. I did that for about 8 months before starting the company.
But tell me, when you spoke about the fintech industry, was there already an architectural model that you could take the blueprint of and then bring it across to Sable and say, right, okay, now we have an actual architectural structure. We just need to tweak this into the construction weave of hierarchy of where people stand within the payment chain?
It's sort of the other way around. That there was an existing solution in the sector, which is the project bank account. So the idea of a project bank account is really simple. They were, I think, first developed by the World Bank in the 1970s when they were trying to lend to regimes with, let's say, low governance regimes. And the idea is simple. It's just a bank account that's dedicated to that project that's then run jointly, usually in that scenario. In the UK, when they came across into construction, it's the same concept. It's an account for that project, but it has a legal trust wrapped around it that ring fences the money and protects it, particularly from insolvencies in the supply chain, because it's not seen as an asset, the money in there. So that existed as a concept. But if you try to do that using conventional analog banking, then you run into a whole load of problems. It's really difficult to open. They take ages to open the accounts. The trust side of it is complex. You've got to get lawyers involved and it's expensive and so on. So they do work and they've been around and well proven. The highways agency here pays for everything using project bank accounts and has done for nearly a decade.
So with the client, if they're building a highway, if government, for example, release the money, they'll release it into a project bank structure.
Yes, through the highways agency, and that project bank account in that case would be run and administered by the main contractor, which is one of the issues with doing it that way.
Can I play devil's advocate and throw a curveball at you?
Of course, yeah.
Could some people not use that model in the sense that if the shit hits the fan, they can just close the business and everything within that project bank account can be set aside from the main corporate business, shall we say? So, Gavin Coyle Roofing Limited can open up Gavin Coyle Carpentry Roofing Limited just purely for that project bank structure, and then if everything fails, it'll all fail within that structure. Am I being just sort of completely cynical on that, or?
No, I mean you're being realistic, right? I think you've been around the industry for long enough to see all the games that people play. It's been for me, a couple of years of having my eyes opened because I didn't know anything about the sector. But no, the way that the accounts work is that because it's a legal trust, the money that is in that account is held in trust, and the beneficiaries of the trust are the payees, the people who are going to be paid. So you can't just take money out of it willy-nilly because the trust protects the money and ring fences it. And particularly, again, as you say, if it's been set up by Gavin Coyle, we know he's not trustworthy for a start, obviously, but if it's been set up by Gavin Coyle Roofing, and Gavin Coyle Roofing has the ability to authorize and make payments straight out of that account, then you can send the money wherever you want. You're just in breach of trust, and therefore there's a whole other bit of the law that comes after you. But you can do that, and that is one of the weaknesses of doing it in the sort of conventional way, or the old school, as I'd say, the analog way. What we've done at Sable is we've taken that concept, and by using the tools, things like digital identities and so on that you get from financial technology, we've separated the flow of authority from the flow of cash. If you have an analog project bank account, then the authority to pay is still wrapped up with the bank account, and the two flow together. In our model, you authorize payments to each other in the supply chain, and the payments are made from that bank account, but it isn't money that's flowing down from the top of the bank of the supply chain to the bottom. It's authority to pay. And only when those authorities are all in place can we calculate how much each individual company is actually due. And then they all get paid from the supply chain. So the cash moves in parallel and everyone gets paid together. The authority flows down just like cash usually would in a normal project.
So, like for the listeners and the viewers on YouTube, the difference between an escrow account and a project bank account, what is that?
You can use a project bank account in an escrow setup, because an escrow is just that you have a trusted third party and you put the money under their control. Basically, they look after it for you, and then they release it when certain conditions are met. That's an escrow account. Some of our accounts are escrow accounts because there will be a trustee who is not directly involved with the project. But for the most part, the client actually acts as trustee they can also appoint the main contractor, or anyone actually can act as the trustee. So it's not an escrow account because we don't hold the money, for example. We're not an escrow agency. It doesn't pass through our balance sheet. It's not, the bank account isn't in our name. It will be in the client's name or the project's name or the main contractor's name. But the key thing is that you can't just go in and do what you like with that money. It's not free capital. You can only authorize payments through the Sable system, and that protects that money from being used for other purposes.
Yeah. So there isn't a layer of bureaucracy, it sounds like, in the system, that it really is an authorization system. But is there not an automatic authorization if someone doesn't actually go in and sort of press a button today? So for example, if the check is released by the client, does it automatically go to everybody else in the chain? And how does the rules around that govern payment?
Because it's a parallel payment system, so everyone gets paid together. The way that actually works is that if you think about your normal payment process on a construction site, what we've done, because the authority flows down just like cash used to, all the contractual relationships and everything remain exactly the same. And the jobs that everyone does on site aren't changed at all. Nothing has changed. The only thing that's changed is the movement of cash. So you'll go through your valuation and certification process on site, and all of the arguing that's attached to that, and everything carries on as normal. Once you've certified the amount that is due, and you reach the point at which you're no longer allowed to issue any pay less notices or mess with that number again. So there is now a point at which the amount that is due has been fixed and agreed. At that point, we open what we call a payment window in Sable. So from that point, you can say, okay, I know this month I am due 100,000 euros. And you'd go into the Sable system and you would say, I'm due 100,000 euros. And that's you telling your customer effectively that you're expecting that. Now, you've already invoiced, you've got the payment certificate. There's no debate about that. And your customer comes in and goes, I owe 100,000 euros to Gavin Coyle roofers. And if those two numbers are the same, then we know that you've agreed that payment. So both sides of that transaction have agreed the amount that's due, but no money moves because Gavin Coyle roofers may have suppliers as well. You'll be doing the same thing with them. You'll be saying, we owe you X, and they'll be saying, we're expecting X. And if X is the same for both of you, great, then that payment's authorized. And that's what allows us then to calculate, of the 100,000 euros, how much was Gavin authorizing on, and therefore how much is due to Gavin's company. And that's what you receive at the same time as your supplier.
Yeah. So there could be a sort of a time lapse in terms of work agreed, certified, signed off, and then the supply chain, depending on how complex the supply chain is, how are you managing to keep the time frame within a reasonable amount of time that allows the system to be user friendly, if you know what I mean? That, automation, it sounds like automation is your key USP in terms of the business model.
You could run it totally manually if it was a fully escrow solution, and you just have somebody make the payments that you calculate based on how much was authorized all the way down. So the technology makes it much quicker and there's less friction. But in principle, it's not actually about the technology. Although having said that, it's quite complex to build. Parallel payment is a bit of a brain bender. You have to get your head around it a little bit. It's quite simple when you see it, but what goes on behind to do all the calculations is less simple. So yeah, I mean, I think when people see it generally, it can sound quite complicated as you're talking through it here. But when you actually see it in operation, you go, oh, right, well, I would have put that number into online banking and now I'm just putting it in here. And then I get paid my amount and I get a little breakdown that tells me where the rest of it went. It's pretty straightforward. Oh, you were asking. Sorry, you were asking about the timing. So I don't know I don't know what contracts are used in the Irish market, but here in the UK, you've got JCT and NEC and those sorts of contracts, and they all set up contractually what the payment times are supposed to be anyway. And we just follow what the contract is setting up. That's our job.
So is there a build out process per project, per client, from your point of view, that needs a bit of tweaking? So you might need to put a project manager as part of the system setup for the client, or is it a plug and play model?
It's basically plug and play, because all you're really doing is authorizing your own direct suppliers' payments, which you would do anyway. And that's done externally. We have an app that runs on your mobile phone. You can use your desktop if you've got lots of payments to make. The key thing is that the reason we use the mobile is that it allows us to collect. We use face recognition, and that allows us to attach the identities of the people who are authorizing and verifying the payment amounts to those transactions. And that creates a complete audit trail for every euro or pound that's spent on that project, which, that's not exposed to anyone. So you don't know how much has been going on. Don't know the amounts of transactions that you're not privy to, but the audit trail exists. So if there is a dispute, then it's very difficult to say, well, I never allowed for that, because your face is attached to you doing it.
Yeah. The sort of the one that's screaming in my head is, who's holding the cash in what bank account, under what regulation, under what structure, so that you're not, obviously from your point of view as a CEO, if you get hacked, where's the structure in that regard, and how do you protect yourself as a business from, being part of something that might go down, that might be an absolute catastrophe for you and everybody else involved?
Well, yes, absolutely. We see ourselves as quite a high priority target, because the amounts involved in the transactions are high. So, people will have a good look at that. We're using in the UK, it's a UK licensed bank that we work with. So we're not a bank ourselves. We use banking infrastructure, and they are set up as a fintech infrastructure bank. Basically, that's their business model. It's all about providing banking services to innovative companies like ours. But we also, our first employee was product, our second employee was engineering, and our third employee was compliance, because we have to make sure that everything we do is rock solid from a regulatory perspective, but also from a security perspective. So our head of compliance, her previous job was the global head of anti-fraud and risk processes at Barclays. That was what she did. So we've taken that very seriously, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Massive, from an oversight point of view, from a cyber security point of view. What about breach testing and all that kind of stuff? I'm sure that person is heavily involved with all of that. So, do you see yourself as a merchant in any way?
No, we're a payments system. We're a payments provider. That's all we are. We're a classic fintech business. We're not an embedded finance business. We don't do lending. We just facilitate payments.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're just sticking in your lane, and you're not actually sort of, okay, we could actually take this a step further and go, why don't we set up another module that pays contractors or pays people? And that's what's in my head, is that you're not competing in that space, because obviously there's a lot of money to be made, and there's a lot of competitors in the market that are doing the payroll side of things, the HR payroll side of things. So let's be very clear, you're not that.
No, we're not doing that. And we're also, we're not a contract management solution or a project management solution. There are lots of really good software that you can use for those processes, that to provide those payment certificates. and down the road, we'll integrate with those. So your payment certificate data will go straight into the Sable payment system, and then you'll authenticate that that's the right amount. But we've worked very hard to allow everyone to carry on using all the systems and processes that they currently use, because trying to change human behavior is extremely difficult. So we've gone for a very narrow point solution, but it's a very important point in the construction journey.
Brilliant. And so I love the fact as well that you said that you brought on some grey hair in the construction industry, and that person that might not be grey and might not have hair. But do you have a board of directors then that you've created in terms of, you know, getting the right people around you? You know, I know you don't have a construction background, but so you've kind of pinpointed that. Talk to me about the governance side of your business, because obviously it's a major talking point for the client, I presume.
Yes. Well, to start with, before we even had a board of directors, I put together an advisory board. What I did there was I tried to go across industry, so that the board has on it, we have a Fintech professor at Birmingham Business School. We have a payment specialist who comes from the payments industry. We have an ex-barrister who was the CEO of the Specialist Contractors Association. We have the ex-group CEO of a tier one major contractor, main contractor. And then we have some people from contracting background. We had an architect. So we had a mix of people from across the industry to help us with those different perspectives. It's been entertaining, I must say, sometimes, because you've got the guy who was from the specialist contractor background, and then you've got a main contractor sitting at the same table, you know, talking about the same problem, but from their separate perspectives. And I'll say that the main contractor, and it's all on our website who all the people are, it's not a secret. But when I first spoke to Andy, he ran Osborne. He was the group CEO of Osborne. I got introduced to him. I had a call with him, and I'd say the first call was, I'd use the word robust, would be a polite way of putting it. But there was enough there that he said, let's speak again. And we did. And now he's a huge advocate for what we're doing. And his whole sort of, his raison d'etre now is to try to help the industry to transform and to take on new technologies. But he's now an evangelist for this. But when we first spoke, he was not.
But I love that about the construction people. You come at them and you have this massive great idea and you have great plans and blah blah blah, and the construction guys just hit you with a sledgehammer straight away, bang. It's kind of like, and if you wobble, you know, at least you haven't wasted their time and you haven't wasted your own time, and you'll go back and you'll learn your lesson from it. But it is a good model, and I've seen it worked in the past, and especially construction it's brilliant for it, because they don't have time, they don't have, you know, the capacity to sit down and sort of put an effort into you, and they're able to cut through the BS straight away and get straight into the point. And you'll either sink or swim based on that, like 2-minute conversation. Sounds like that was his apprentice moment with you.
There was certainly a bit of that, yeah. I think the thing that really helped with Andy was that I realised fairly early on that main contractors weren't going to be very keen on what we're doing, because they often cash flow their businesses on the supply chain by arbitraging the payment terms from the client. He's probably paying on 30 days and then paying a lot later to their suppliers. And you can get free cash flow from that. Basically, it's free credit from the supply chain. And that's a pretty fundamental part of a lot of business models for main contractors. So I knew that they weren't going to be supportive of what we were doing, because you can't do that in our model, because you're only ever getting your cash. You don't get everyone else's. So I figured, well, who can tell the main contractor what to do? The client. So the client I need on side. But who can tell the client what to do? Well, that would be in the private sector, the lender, if there is finance coming into the project. So before I actually went and spent £12 at company's house and started the company with officially, I said, I need to get 3 specialist lenders to give me a letter of intent and say that they would use this if it existed. And if I can do that, then I'll go and spend those £12. So I had 3 letters of intent before I had a company, because if I didn't have the lenders on board, it was going to be very, very difficult.
Very smart. Well done. And like, for anyone listening, that's like, there's gold in that conversation that you've just put forward, in terms of didn't even start a company, went and got the letter of intent, went and seen the hierarchy of control and where the barriers were and where the barrier to entry was. The barrier to entry was the main contractor. And in some cases, you probably don't know this, or you probably know now, is that some of the main contractors are funding some of their existing work from previous work, or from work that they're just parallel going on at the same time as that project, and they need a collective cash flow as opposed to an individual project cash flow. And you're causing a problem for them in that regard, because you're saying, no, this money's set aside for here right now in the moment for this job number, not for that job number. And it would have been a shorter conversation than the one you had with Osborne.
There are some silver linings to the cloud for the main contractor. The business model has to change. It is a dysfunctional model at the moment, and the reason that is the case, in my view, is because margins are too small. So the margins at the top of the supply chain for the main contractor are too small. And that's because clients drive lowest price tendering. So the client also has to realize that isn't going to fly in this situation. I talk about this a lot, that every construction project is different. And as a scientist, that's because like I say, I'm a scientist. You can't compare construction project A with B, because even if you're building the same house or the same tower, there's a different project team. There's a different ground environment. There are different financial conditions at the time. There's everything. There are so many variables that every project is unique. And in that situation where you've got that much complexity, it's impossible to budget or predict how long and how much a thing is going to take. There's too much complexity. So there's going to be error in your estimation, and you need margin for error. That's literally profit margin for error, because sometimes you're going to be wrong on the upside and sometimes you're going to be wrong on the downside, and your margin needs to be big enough to accommodate that error. And we've got low single digit percentage margins at main contractors. That's not enough margin for error. And so what do? You have to create that margin. You have to bump it up. How can I create margin easily? Well, I can take the cash and I can use that to fund past debt and make money on the money effectively by delaying payment. And that's why I think you see main contractors chasing turnover. When I came into this industry from technology, I couldn't understand why everyone talks about their turnover all the time. That's the number that you're a £2 billion turnover business. That's great, but how much margin are you making? What's your profit? That's what actually matters. But the reason that the turnover is so important is because the higher your turnover, the more cash you've got washing through your account, and therefore you can make those. But if you are chase turnover like that, you've got to keep growing the turnover. If it takes a dip at any point, those debts that are chasing along from 6-9 months ago catch up with you. And that's why Carillion, that's why ISG, that's why Henry's, these big contractors are taken down by 2 or 3 projects going badly at the same time.
It's a house of cards.
It's a house of cards. In fact, that my co-founder wrote a report in 2018, just before the Carillion collapse, and it literally has a picture of a house of cards on the front of it.
Oh man, like talk to me about the future for the business and where you're going to go with this. Like, what's your plan? I know you're early stage enough. One thing we did mention in the pre-chat chat was, the value add that you can give to client in terms of how much money has been put into the community on a particular project and how data can be important for their ESG and for, their general sort of future economic benefit from using your software. So, maybe talk to me a little bit about that and then talk to me about what the future holds for you.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. I think we've seen a lot of interest from the public sector, UK government, particularly because we had a massive insolvency in September of ISG, and they were a 2 billion turnover business, something like 800 million to a billion of debt. So when they went under, that's what disappeared. And a lot of that was public money. So we've had a lot of interest from the public sector looking at what we're doing, and we enable something that they're supposed to be doing anyway, because project bank accounts are already in the construction playbook in the UK. So for them, the ability to demonstrate that you are paying SMEs for a start, which they know that there are SMEs all over their projects, but they don't pay the SME. They pay a PLC main contractor who pays subbies who then pay the SMEs. So there's the ability to show that you've got money going through to SMEs is important. Then you can show that you're paying them within the legislated time period, which is 30 days now on the new Procurement Act in the UK. So you can show money going to small businesses, which is a big tick for the public sector. You can show that it's making its way there promptly, which is another big tick. But because we conduct know your customer checks on everybody, so when you come onto the platform, we're checking your identity, we're checking your company exists, your bank account is correct, all of those things are happening. We also know where you're located, and therefore we can help the client to report back and say, of the £12 million that were spent on this project, 9 million of them went to businesses located within the MP constituency, the local council area, the postcode, whatever the thing is that they're interested in. And that shows the local economic multiplier. Now, interestingly, in the private sector, you think, oh, that's probably of a lot less relevance, but it's not, because the people who fund the banks, so if you go all the way up above the lenders, you've got pension funds and you've got the big investment houses. They've got very stringent requirements around ESG. So they want to show that they are not contributing to an insolvency crisis and suicides and mental health problems. And they want to show they're investing in local economies. So actually the same rationale applies to public and private sector.
Yeah. Brilliant story. Absolute brilliant. I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm going, music background, tour manager. Like, how the hell?
It doesn't make any sense.
You're a very smart person. I have to hand it to you, Jarvey. Like I've taken a lot from this conversation. Like, definitely the one about, looking at the barrier to entry and, not setting up the company until you had, the people behind you to back you that were the main drivers for this. And, it's a massive problem. We don't need to regurgitate it over and over again. It is a big problem that's not getting solved. And there's some people doing some brilliant stuff in this area. And we've had them on the show as well in terms of, raising awareness and, putting out templates and processes and systems that people can adopt into their companies and stuff like that. But something that always bugs me is the transparency of the movement of money. And it's something that's kind of stuck with me in terms of construction, is that there was always this hidden veil of the check and where the check is, and is it there? Is it not there? Does the person have the actual check to deliver? Or am I just going to have and you're completely blind in a lot of the current situations as regards where that check is, and is the check in the post or is it on the way? I'll never forget a story. A construction company I worked with years ago, and we were all heading home for Christmas off the construction site. And on the way out, because there was so much drama of people trying to get home for Christmas and stuff like that, there was a lad on a motorbike, and he said to one of our workers, he says, it says, save me going up onto the building site. There's an envelope there for your company. Would you mind passing it on? And he said, yeah, that's grand. So he said, I'm not going back all the way back to the construction site. So he put it in his bag, whatever else, went home, getting ready for the Christmas. And it was just this massive, like, what the hell? They were all the checks to pay all the contractors. This is back in the 90s, and there were all the checks to pay. And they were like, where the hell is all these checks gone? You know what I mean? It was just, look, I'm trying to make sort of a connection between where's the money? Where the hell is the money? And still to this day, you know, the transparency issue is a massive issue. And I think if you can stick, from my mind, if you can stick on the focus of the transparency issue of everybody being aligned on the flow of money, like I can't see but why this wouldn't work. And I can see why people won't want to adopt it or will push back on it. And I'm interested to see. It'd be great to have you back on in the future, to get some case studies, because I know you're pretty much 2 years up and running, so it'll be a while before you get some sort of solid case studies under your belt. A couple of curved balls for you, if you don't mind, Jarvey. Definitely, since a point of interest of you that nobody would really recognize, and I think we're after covering the tour manager, but is there something else going on that someone might say, never knew that about Jarvey?
Well, I'm still making music. I still make and release music still after all these years. That's still something I do, but I don't really publicize it. It's on Spotify, but you'd be doing well to find it, basically.
What type of genre are you making?
I think it's unpopular music. It's probably that's what it's called.
Yeah, the other, actually the other thing that I connected with you as well is obviously the famous Grand Designs episode where the guy was in the music industry and built this massive house overlooking the sea, and the whole thing collapsed and the money dried up. And I don't know if you remember that program, but
I don't know that one. No, I remember the program, but
it was I think he was part of the Euphoria brand, the dance brand or franchise, if you like, and made his money from that. So it's one to look up at, but it's another shocker of how the client didn't, you know, he was going to lenders to get the money, and obviously the build didn't go according to plan. It's a fairly famous episode. A favorite book or movie or both. It doesn't have to be business now, Jarvey.
No, I think non-fiction. Non-fiction probably maybe Catch-22. I really like Catch-22, just because it just captures the ridiculousness of sort of organizational life. You know, when you're working in a company. Fiction. That I should say, not non-fiction. Fiction. Although again, maybe not. Non-fiction. I've just finished a book called Fluke, which perfectly captures the way that I think the world works, and you can probably tell from the title, and what I said earlier. So my worldview's been for a long while that we, as humans, we like to put a narrative on our lives. So we like to be able to say X happened and therefore Y happened. And because I'm me, I'm amazing, and Z happened. And if it had been someone else, you know, it wouldn't have. But the world doesn't really work like that. The world is far more complex than that. Most of the things that happen to you are completely outside of your control. And we have much less agency than we think we have, basically. And Fluke is just a very eloquent and articulate exposition on that point. And I strongly recommend it, as long as you are existentially secure enough to deal with that, which not everybody is. If you like certainty, then probably don't read that.
Yeah, sounds interesting. I'll definitely be looking that one up myself.
I do. I want to take issue with something you said earlier, though. You said something like, you're a smart guy because you've done all these things. That's nothing to do with being smart at all. I come from the technology industry, from where startups live and die daily. There's an evolutionary process going on in technology, and there are lots of books about the things you should do when you start a new business in technology. And I just did what those books say. Like all the things I've been talking about, I didn't come up with them myself. They're well-established things that you should try and do. It's just that outside of the technology industry, people don't always think about their product in quite the same way. So I would take issue with any suggestion that I'm smart. I think I'd just read the right books and then try and do what they say.
Well, but I also said you were humble, so
yeah, well, anyone who knows me knows that's not true, so that's not going to fly.
Knowing what you know now, what would you do different, Jarvey?
To be honest, if you think back to what we've just been talking about Fluke, nothing, because most of the decisions that you make, that you agonize over, make very little difference to your life. And then the decisions that you take without a moment's thought completely change your life. I've had, so far, touch wood, I've had a really interesting life. I've always done things because they interest me and I think they'll be fun. And therefore I wouldn't change any of those things.
Brilliant. And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that? Talk to me about connecting with you. I'm sure you're open to discovery calls and stuff like that to talk to people about the product.
Yeah, I love talking about it, as you can probably tell. I'm on LinkedIn, and as you say, during the pre-chat we were talking about that. I have a lot of issues with LinkedIn, but I'm trying to find a way for us to coexist peacefully, me and LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, and I have an unusual name, so I'm very easy to find generally. The company's called Sable. Our website, sable.co.uk. So come and say hi. If you're interested in what we're doing, come and find out about it. I think we've been looking at, subcontractors, particularly, or specialist contractors, I think is a better name. I like specialist contractors and general contractors, I think is the right names to use. But our product is obviously very popular with specialist contractors, as you can imagine, but they don't really get to say we want it to be used. It's a client decision. So we're having a look at the moment at maybe later this year or next year we might run a crowdfunding opportunity so that specialist contractors can actually come and buy some equity and be part of the journey with us. Because our stated mission is to change the payment culture in the construction industry. And I think that audience very much want that to happen. So that would be, so even as a specialist contractor, who can't necessarily buy our product, you can still be part of that journey with us if you choose. That's a plan. I don't know if we'll actually do it, but it's the plan.
No, it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea. Jarvey Moss, what a great conversation. I really enjoyed it today. Can't thank you enough, but definitely want you to come back in a couple of months' time or a year's time.
Yeah, it'll be a little more than a couple of months, I think, for us to prove what we're doing. Yeah. I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. And we wish you all the best. We'll put some links in the show notes as well of your website and stuff like that so people can contact you. We wish you the very best of success with the product, and thank you very much again.
No, you're welcome, Gavin. Really enjoyed it, and good luck with what you're up to as well.
All right, take care.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hello, gaffers. Hope you're enjoying the podcast. We love every one of the guests that we have, but in order to bring on more great guests, we'd love to build the channel with you. So hit the subscribe, hit the like button, and let's create a really great community where we bring in better and better guests for you to deliver great content and great pieces of information that you can take back into your business.